The sand does not move. That is the first thing you notice. In most deserts, there is at least some whisper of wind, some faint breath that lifts a grain or two and carries it a few inches forward. But here, in the Atacama Plateau of northern Chile, the air itself seems to have given up. The silence is not peaceful. It is the silence of something that has been waiting so long, it has forgotten what it was waiting for. The ground beneath your feet is not sand in the way most people picture sand. It is a crust, pale, saline, almost ceramic in texture. It cracks when you step on it like old porcelain, like something that was never meant to be walked on. The cracks reveal a darkness underneath, a substrate so dry that scientists have compared it not to any place on Earth but to the surface of Mars. And they were not being poetic, they were being precise. For decades, researchers searching for the boundary of life on this planet have come to the Atacama and asked a question that seems almost cruel in its simplicity. Is there anything alive here? Not dormant, not buried, not waiting in spores or seeds at the edge of some slightly more hospitable zone, but alive, here, now, in this. The answer, for a very long time, was no. Some parts of the Atacama receive less than 1 millimeter of rain per year. To put that in context, a single human sneeze releases more moisture into the air than this landscape receives from the sky in 12 months. The hyperarid core of the Atacama, the true dead heart of it, went without measurable rain for more than 500 consecutive years. We know this because the stones remember. Geochemists read the isotopic signatures in the soil the way a physician reads a blood panel, and what the stones told them was stark, not a drop, not once. Not for generations of human civilizations rising and falling somewhere else on the same planet. And yet, this is always where the story turns, isn't it? This is the place where science earns its keep, not in the easy explanations, not in the things we already suspected, but in the moments when the universe insists on doing something we told it not to. In 2017, something happened in the Atacama. A weather event so unusual, so contrary to everything the region had experienced in recorded history, that the scientists who witnessed it initially questioned their instruments. Rain fell, not a symbolic dusting, not the kind of moisture that might blur the reading on a gauge but leave the ground as dry as ash. Rain fell in quantities sufficient to form puddles, to run in rivulets across the surface of the crust, to sink, however briefly, into the soil beneath. The Atacama received what meteorologists described as an anomalous precipitation event, driven by a rare southward displacement of moisture from the tropical Pacific, nudged by a warming pattern in the Eastern Ocean that bore the fingerprints of a changed climate. The desert, by every meteorological definition, had been rained upon. And then the desert woke up. Within days, not weeks, not seasons, but days, something unthinkable began to happen across the slopes and flats of the Atacama. From a substrate that had tested by every available instrument as essentially devoid of living organisms, flowers began to emerge, not in ones or twos, not as isolated anomalies scattered across kilometers, in blooms, in carpets, in what the Chilean people call the Desierto Florido, the flowering desert. A phenomenon so rare, so mythologized in the culture of the region, that older generations had described it to their grandchildren as something that happened once in a lifetime, if that. The slopes turned purple and yellow and white. Species of Cistanthe and Nolana, low, succulent, wind-tough plants that produce flowers of extraordinary precision and color, spread across ground that had appeared to every casual observer to be dead. Absolutely, irrevocably, finally dead. How does a desert bloom when nothing was supposed to be alive in it? The answer requires us to rethink what we mean by alive. It requires us to sit with the uncomfortable possibility that our categories, living, dead, dormant, extinct, are human inventions, and that the natural world does not particularly care about them. Beneath the surface of the hyperarid Atacama, locked into the mineral structure of the soil in a state that biologists call anhydrobiosis, there existed seeds, not just seeds in the ordinary sense, the plump, oil-rich seeds of temperate plants with their neat little embryos waiting for the first spring warmth. These were extremophile seeds, engineered by millions of years of selection pressure into something closer to suspended information than living tissue. They had shed almost all of their water. Their cellular machinery had slowed to a halt so complete that no metabolism was detectable, no respiration, no chemical exchange with the environment. By the most conservative definitions, they were not alive, but they were not dead. The distinction matters. It matters philosophically, and it matters scientifically, because what these seeds had achieved was something that no human technology has yet replicated with comparable elegance. They had found a way to pause the clock, not slow it, pause it indefinitely. The biology of anhydrobiosis, the word means literally life without water, is one of the great unsolved problems of cell biology. We know some of what happens. When a cell is dehydrated catastrophically, its membranes would normally collapse and fuse, its proteins would denature, its DNA would fracture under the strain of radical oxygen species that accumulate when normal metabolic defenses break down. But certain organisms, certain seeds, certain nematodes, certain moss species, and a remarkable animal called the tardigrade produce a sugar called trehalose in vast quantities as they dry. Trehalose is not merely a preservative in the way that salt is a preservative. It replaces the water molecules in the cell with a glassy, amorphous matrix that holds every membrane, every protein, every strand of DNA exactly where it was. It is as though the cell has been cast in biological amber, not frozen, not preserved, held, and then the rain falls. What happens next is not gradual, it is explosive. When water contacts a trehalose-protected cell, the rehydration process is rapid and remarkably faithful. The glass liquefies, the proteins fold back into their functional shapes, the membranes recover their bilayer architecture, the mitochondria begin to hum. Within hours, in some cases minutes, a cell that appeared indistinguishable from a mineral grain is generating ATP, reading its genome, building proteins, dividing. Imagine a sentence suspended mid-word for 100 years and then completed, perfectly, without error, as though no time had passed. This is what anhydrobiosis achieves. This is what the Atacama's seeds had been doing, not for 100 years, but potentially for decades beneath a surface that received no water at all. But the seeds alone do not explain the scale of what happened in 2017, because what emerged in the Desierto, Florido, was not only plant life, it was a community, a whole, articulated, interdependent ecological community, assembled in days from what appeared to be nothing. The flowers came first, and within a week the pollinators arrived. Bees, Andean species, specialists of arid zones, appeared from mountainous refugia, dozens of kilometers away, drawn by chemical signals that moved through the air ahead of the visual display. Beetles followed, and with them the first predatory insects, wasps and robber flies that had been persisting in scattered microhabitats at the desert margins, compressed into thin populations that left no evidence of themselves on the open plain. Lizards emerged, specific, evolved lizards, the Atacama's own species, the lifeless of the hyper-arid plateau, reptiles so physiologically adapted to water scarcity that their uric acid is nearly dry, their skin losing less moisture per square centimeter per hour than a sealed plastic bottle. They came into the flowering zones and fed, and with their feeding came the hawks. In 11 days, a food web assembled itself on ground that had been inert stone. 11 days. We speak about ecosystems as though they are things that take centuries to build, and in one sense that is exactly right. The evolutionary relationships embedded in this desert food web, the co-adapted curves of a bee's tongue and a Nolana flower's corolla, the lizard immune system calibrated to the precise parasite load of this plateau, all of that took millions of years to construct. The Desierto Florido did not create a new ecology. It revealed one that had been waiting, encoded, invisible, in the soil and in the margins and in the memory of the landscape itself. This is perhaps the most important idea in all of modern ecology, and it is one that the natural world keeps demonstrating with a patience that shames our attention spans. An ecosystem is not a thing. It is a potential. It is a set of relationships waiting for the conditions that allow them to express themselves. Remove the conditions and the relationships go quiet, go cryptic, go underground, or into dormancy or into the surrounding landscape's margins. Restore the conditions even once, even briefly, and the relationships reassemble with a speed that looks from the outside like magic. It is not magic, it is information. It is 3 billion years of evolutionary memory stored in molecules and behaviors and seed coats and fungal networks, and it is ready, always ready, to reassemble into life the moment the world asks it to. What does this mean for the rest of us? For the degraded landscapes, the drained wetlands, the overgrazed grasslands, the logged hillsides, and the paved-over river corridors that define so much of what humanity has done to the living world? It means something almost impossibly hopeful if we are willing to think carefully about what we're being told. The rewilding movement, that loose, contentious, vital coalition of ecologists and land managers and visionaries attempting to step back from the management of landscapes and allow natural processes to resume, has been arguing for 2 decades that degraded ecosystems retain a residual capacity for self-organization that we persistently underestimate. George Monbiot, speaking of the Cambrian mountains of Wales and rewilding Europe, working across the continent's post-agricultural zones, and the Pleistocene Park project in Siberia, and 100 smaller, quieter experiments on every continent, all of them rest on the same core observation. That life, given even a fraction of the conditions it needs, will try. It will try harder than we expect, and faster than we expect, and in ways we did not predict. The Atacama taught us something even more extreme. It told us that life will try in conditions we had classified as impossible, that the boundary between dead and dormant is not where we drew it, that the archive of an ecosystem can survive in a state we cannot currently detect and emerge whole when the signal finally comes. There are places on Earth right now, thousands of them, that we have looked at and said it's too late, too degraded, too long gone. The species are extinct locally, the soil biology is destroyed, the seed bank is exhausted, the hydrology is broken. We have looked at them with honest eyes and made what seemed like a reasonable assessment. The Atacama asks us whether our instruments are adequate to the task. It asks us whether the categories we use, dead, gone, beyond recovery, have been checked against what the landscape actually contains, or whether we have only checked them against what we can currently measure. Consider the fungal networks, the mycorrhizal webs that connect plant roots and transfer nutrients and chemical signals across distances that dwarf individual organisms. We have known about mycorrhizal networks for decades, but our understanding of their resilience, their ability to persist in dormant or depauperate states beneath soils that appear lifeless, is still in its early chapters. Recent research in former agricultural fields has found mycorrhizal spore banks persisting for 40, 50, 60 years after the last host plants were removed, waiting, holding the blueprint. Consider the soil invertebrate communities of former grasslands, compressed into tiny refuge zones around the bases of remaining plants, invisible to a walking survey, detectable only by the most painstaking sampling. Consider the microbial communities of degraded wetlands, persisting in anaerobic layers below the surface of drained peat, their genomes intact, their metabolic potential suspended. Consider every seed that has ever fallen into a crack in a stone and stayed there, cooling and warming through seasons and decades, neither germinating nor rotting, because the conditions were never quite right and never quite fatal. The world is full of pauses, not endings. Pauses. And this is where we must be careful, because the lesson of the Atacama can be misread. It can become a license for complacency, a way of telling ourselves that nature is resilient enough to absorb whatever we give it, that the living world will bounce back if we simply stop worrying. This is not what the evidence says. The Atacama bloomed because the rain came, because the conditions changed, because something shifted in the Pacific and a meteorological anomaly crossed a threshold and gave dormant life the signal it had been waiting for. What will give our degraded landscapes the signal they need? What will restore the hydrology, the soil structure, the large herbivore pressure, the predator dynamics, the fire regimes that countless plant communities evolved alongside? The answer, in most cases, is not to wait for an anomalous weather event. It is to choose, to actively, deliberately, humbly begin restoring the conditions under which life's residual memory can express itself. We are, whether we like it or not, the anomalous rainfall event for most of Earth's damaged ecosystems. We are the only disturbance capable of changing conditions fast enough to matter within a human lifetime. And that is a strange and heavy kind of power to hold. Stand again in the Atacama now, in your mind. Feel the crust beneath your feet. Listen to the silence. Let the scale of it, the 500 years of no rain, the ceramic stillness of the hyper-arid core, settle into you. And then hold alongside that the other image, purple slopes, yellow and white carpets, bees moving between flowers in air that had no business carrying pollen, a hawk circling above ground that was, 11 days ago, stone. The desert was not dead. It was remembering in the only language available to it what it knew how to be. And when the conditions finally arrived, it did not hesitate. It did not wait for permission. It did not hold a committee meeting to discuss whether recovery was feasible, or whether the damage had been too severe, or whether enough time had passed to justify the attempt. It simply became itself. And perhaps that is the deepest thing the natural world has ever tried to tell us, not through metaphor or symbol or the convenient projections of a species that has always looked to nature for instruction, but through the plain, biochemical, undeniable fact of its behavior. Given the conditions, life remembers.